Please welcome to the stage Anne Rapp and Tim O'Brien. But anyway, Anne, just congratulations. I mean, I can't say that enough. I just teared up numerous times watching this movie. I can just feel just the love that you have for Horton Foote, the passion, and I know how long and hard you worked on this, obviously, but it just strikes me. It's just a stunning accomplishment. It's so hard to do.
Well, you know, I've said this many times.
Of a writer,
Yeah. The smartest thing I did on this film was, figure out, let's put a camera on him.
We'll start filming.
And just turn it on and make sure it keeps running, because he's the film.
He sure is, but what was your impulse? You had worked with him, known him for years, but he's getting up there. Did you say, like, I just want to, someone needs to make this film, and who better than me? You had to feel chosen, right?
Well, basically, I stayed in touch with Horton from 1981 when I was a script supervisor on Tender Mercies. That's where I met him. And
greatest Texas film ever.
Yeah, if you haven't seen Tender Mercies, do yourself a favor.
Yeah.
And so we stayed friendly after that film because I had a lot of opportunities to sit around and talk to him on the set a little bit, and we bonded very quickly when he figured out I was from a small town. Mm-hmm. Our conversations never had anything to do with film or theater. They had to do with the cotton gin in my town and the cotton gin. And I'm from the Panhandle, opposite end of Texas. Mm-hmm. And we just told stories all the time to each other. And that was back way before internet and email and all of that and cell phones. And we wrote letters and cards. And so I stayed in touch with him for many years. And when I moved back here in 2000, he was, Lillian had passed away, and he was coming back. He was living with Hallie at the time in L.A., and it was coming back to Wharton a lot and spending time there and writing and working. He loved working there. And so I would go down and spend these afternoons with him, and his favorite thing to do was have lunch and then get in the car, and Hallie would drive, and I would either be in the front with her or in the back with him, and we would drive up and down every street in that town, and he would just tell me these stories about, what's this so-and-so lived here, and this guy shot his brother, and that used to be a cotton, and whatever, and that story about the sheriff, the one that opens the film. Anyway, and I have way more of that. I could do another movie with stories that didn't make the film. But anyway, it was, and I would drive home just euphoric, because it's about 2.5 hour drive back to Austin, thinking, he's giving me the backdrop of he's wrote for 70 years. And not too long after that, I was at a film festival with some friends of filmmakers from Dallas, a film festival down in Beaumont. And someone at the table asked me, he actually ended up being one of my producers who's here tonight. I'll introduce a few people here in a minute. But we were all talking, a couple of my producers at that table, and guys who became producers. But they were like, hey, you ever see Horton, And I'm like, yeah, I see him all the time. And I go down and we do these drives and everything. And they looked at me like I was crazy. They were like, did it never occur to you to put a camera on him? And I'm just like thinking, oh, he's my buddy, and and so that inspired it. And so the next time I saw him, I asked him if we could start following him around with the camera. And he said, let me think about it. He didn't say yes right off the bat. About 2 weeks later, I was out in L.A., and I had dinner with him at Hallie's house. And I was in the living room with Horton, and she's in the kitchen. And he said, Anne, I have to say, I thought about what you asked me, and I'm going to let you do it, but you have to promise me one thing. And I said, okay, what's that? And he said, you have to promise me that you'll never ask me on camera who my characters are based on. and suddenly Hallie, who's listening in the kitchen, she goes, oh, Dad, they're all dead. and he said, yeah, but their grandchildren are still here. And that's so Horton. And so, but then he went on to say, one of the greatest things anyone's ever said to me, which is, I'm going to let you do this film because I trust you. And this is what happened.
Yeah, I think it's understood. I think for everybody close, like you're the only human he would have let make this film. So we're just so glad you did.
Well, thank you. I do feel like, thank you.
Yeah.
We were comfortable talking, and I'd never interviewed people. I didn't know how. In fact, I had to stop myself all the time because I would make racket over his talk.
Oh, no.
I
The sound person saying, hey.
you say where you go, yeah, when someone's talking, or you laugh when they say something. And I just had to train myself to put tape over my mouth after I finished my question. But he was comfortable talking to me, and I knew him well enough that I knew a lot of the good stuff to ask, I guess. So I don't know. He was brilliant for the film.
You know, if you ever have a DVD in the extras, if they even still do that, they can.
Yeah.
Just have Horton stories and take all your outtakes.
Oh
And
gosh.
share all those because I want to see them.
There's so
Everybody
many
does.
of them. The some of the things that I think my editor's here tonight, David Fabello, wonderful, unbelievably great editor. This film is just is made because of him as well. But I would hang on to these stories, and I always had good people in there. My post-production supervisor, who's also here, Jason Whaling, and they would constantly say, Anne, we can't put everything in there. Or this film is going to be 4 hours long, and it would kill me to kill the babies.
It's painful, isn't it? Yeah,
But
you got to.
so there's a lot more stories, but the ones we used are great.
Yeah, and so, okay, he passed away in 2009. What year did you start shooting?
Let's see. Well, I can tell
A few
you.
years before
Let
that?
me just.
'Cause
It was
I'm
about.
trying to get at how many years.
He died in 2009. I started. I think it was December 2006. We filmed for almost 3 years. I think it was December 2006. Somebody else do the math. I used to be a
Right.
math major, but it was 15 years from the time I rolled a camera on him until we finished the last
When you
post-production
said
act
final film.
and said, it's done.
Yeah.
And it was a long road, we had a lot of ups and downs. And I was doing a lot of other stuff at the same time, and went through a couple of different situations with a different editing crew. And it was literally after I got back to Austin, after a lot of movies that I was working on. And one day I just sat down and had a long talk with myself, and I said, here's what you're going to do. You're going to do one or two things, and you're going to do it right now. You're going to say, wave the white flag, I tried my best, I'm sorry, but it didn't happen. Or you're just going to pull up your bootstraps and you're going to get this done no matter what. Because I knew production like the back of my hand, but I didn't know post-production. And that's where I kept falling down.
That's what documentaries are.
I know, but I ended up with the best post-production crew right here in Austin, and it just took me that long to find them, and we started. Once we dove in, then within a year and a half, we had the film finished. Yeah.
So Tim, you knew Horton a bit. I kind of want to hear some of your, this film obviously shows
the
Anne's
Horton I
relation, but
knew
I'm
was
curious.
Really, the Horton that Anne captured in this film. He struck me as a saint, or at least saintly, the kindest man I ever met, the most courteous man I've ever met. But as someone said in the film, he also had a hardness to me, that I thought, in his work. The writing is. He speaks in a halting way. You've heard it tonight almost all the time. He's looking for the right word. But when you hear the dramatic renditions, the language, it's not halting. It's fully human. It's not glib by any means. And there's a beauty to how he turns ordinary human speech, the rhythms of the speech, the brevity, how he compresses emotion. He did. I had I had several encounters with him. I was with him for 2 weeks in the mountains of Tennessee at a writers' conference called Swanee, and we were drinking one night afterward, and Horton was sort of across the room, and I mentioned to a fellow sitting next to me, "Isn't he the nicest man you've ever met?" He said, "Yeah, he's nice, except in the playwriting workshop." And I said, "What's the problem?" He said, "Not really a problem. He had he'd read and discussed my play today." And I said, "How did it go?" And he said, "Well, my play was not up to Horton's standards," which it was the line that Horton had used with him in the class. "This play is not up to my standards." There's a hardness in that kind of language. I wouldn't want to hear that from even a bad writer, much less
Hardness, but
much
it's not
less a good one.
technically a put down. I'm sure his standards are the top 1%. But
And the other thing I remember about Horton was he was funny. He was funny in that quiet way of his. He'd make me laugh sometimes with the civil understatement of everything that came out of that man's mouth was understated. There was nothing. The word flashy was used. There was nothing flashy about that man. It was civil understatement. You hardly believe he's from Texas. I'm kidding. At least the present day Texas.
And the choice, I think it works so well because it's so hard to depict, a writer. You can show their life and interview them, but to see their words. So the choice to have the monologues, I don't know if I would call them interstitial, throughout.
Right.
That's a big idea, and it's a really good idea. But when did that occur to you? Like, oh, we got to bring Horton's words to life in that way to,
Right.
make this not just a biography. We want to involve,
Well, as things often happen, just for a completely different reason, when we were just starting to talk about putting the film together and in the early stages of that, getting film clips was easy because all the film clips were pretty much whatever they call it, public domain or fair use or whatever it is. And the film industry is a lot looser than that in theater. And I cannot tell you how hard it was to even go to, when I would go to New York, just to view a film clip of a stage production. I had to give them my wallet and my keys and my cell phone and my car to go in there, and then you could watch it, but you couldn't rewind anything, and you were like it was a police state almost. And I just found it really interesting that, and so getting film clips of theater productions was way more difficult. And I knew that was going to cost a lot of money.
And they're shot really poorly, too. There's like a camera in the back, whatever.
Yeah. So there was some early discussion with a couple of my producers. We had already talked about what if we put some actors on a stage and just shot our own thing. And then when I got to my latest editing crew, one of the producers from that group had the exact same idea. And I said, that's, great minds think alike. We've already kind of talked about that. So we just, that's when the decision was made to just put, an actor on stage reading some of these passages. So I went back, and at first I thought, oh, it's going to be a daunting task to go read all the plays and try to find those passages. And actually, it was one of the most fun parts of because I ended up reading plays I'd never even read yet. And so I went through and found all those passages. Then there was a discussion about how we were going to do them, and it was suggested by a few people that we should get, well-known actors. I should go out to Hollywood and try to get some of these well-known actors, which would have been a good idea. But again, the budget's constraints and all of that. But I also felt very strongly that if I have famous actors up there reading these words, they're going to be looking at the actor, and they're not going to be listening to the words. And there are great actors right here in our community that it'll all be about the words. And I am so proud of those monologues and those actors. I don't know if any of them are here tonight, but if so, I would love them to stand up, because we ended up with 9, and 6 of them came through a dear friend of mine who teaches at Texas State in film. She got a lot of those actors out of Texas State, and a couple of professors from there. And then Miguel Alvarez, my producer from here, came up with, I think, 3 of them. And then the last one, Sherry Wagner, is the woman at the end that does the coffin in Egypt. She's not even an actor.
Really?
I had been in I'd been at a dinner party one night where they did this thing where she just kind of read some Eudora Welty stories to the crowd. And later we were trying to find a woman for that part, and we were just having a hard time. And I thought of her, and I called her up and said, would you just if I send you a couple of passages, would you read them? And send me a cell phone. And she got her granddaughter to come over and film her on the cell phone. And she's not even an actor, and she's so good. But you know what? You listen to the words with those guys.
It's such a tribute to the words. You see how they can carry.
Yeah,
everything.
and I'm so proud of those guys.
Famous actor, not famous actor, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Those words just
right
carry the whole boat.
Yeah.
Know? So anyway, I just really love that element of it. You know,
well,
I just think
thank you, and I'm lucky that those guys were available.
Mm-hmm. So did you learn a lot more about Horton? I guess you have to, right? And did you learn a lot more about his past than you knew? Or he told you all the stories as you edited, like after he had passed away? Were you still learning a lot about him?
Yeah. And you know, I mean, I had been down there enough to just pick up tidbits, and I heard a lot of the same stories over and over. But before I did my interview, even though I sort of knew a lot about him and his hometown, and I was very friendly with Hallie, and knew Daisy fairly well too, over the years. And so the thing I did that helped me the most is I went back and reread his memoir called Farewell. And if anybody wants to really know about his childhood, it's a wonderful memoir. He wrote another one about his life as a playwright that started when he left and went to Pasadena and then to New York. And but the one that just blew me away and gave me all the fodder for my interviews was his memoir, Farewell. Okay. And it's just rich with his childhood from birth to 16 years old. And I would sometimes be in the car with him, and I would ask him about, like, somebody that worked at the cotton gin, and he'd look at me like, how did you know that? And I read your book. Yeah. And so anyway, but I have to say, Horton was, of everyone I've ever met in my life, he was the best listener. All those years that I spent time with him, and especially when we were filming and everything. And I think you captured it if you just watched the kind of impromptu moments where they're cooking dinner at the house or he's sitting around or whatever. He's never the guy talking. And I'm telling you, I've spent a lot of years in Hollywood, and there's a lot of holding court in Hollywood with the big dogs. But Horton was always the quietest man in the room, just watching everybody and listening, and his curiosity was just overwhelming. And that's why he was
taking it all in. It's so interesting to just look at it, that he had this acting impulse, but really what he had was characters, right? Just his, what he observed from the world. He was channeling it, and then when he finds his outlet, I mean, that's a great story. Agnes DeMille saying, have you written? No. The fact that he didn't see that as an outlet till he was, mature. He didn't want to write as a child or a young person, but he clearly wanted to express himself.
Right.
He had stories in him, the acting impulse, but to go on that writer's journey. I don't know, Tim, what do you think? Are there different kind of writers in the world? Do you think he's I don't know, I just see characters, he's hearing everything and imagining stories from their lives and all that. Other people write what happens, their own autobiography, you know, like, I don't know, how do you see his own
I think
as a writer,
probably-
you know,
probably,
his own writers?
yeah, I think almost all writers, you can't write out of nothingness. You live a life and you encounter people. That doesn't mean, I think, that you try to represent them exactly in the world. I might borrow a trait from you and one from Anne and one from anybody in the audience. But ultimately, it's all an amalgam in my imagination. When I'm writing well, there's a woman in front of me and she's sad or she's happy or angry, and I see her the same way I felt when I was listening to the actors read those parts from Wharton's plays. I felt those people had become the characters Wharton had imagined. It's the world of imagination, a little bit like a daydream and a little bit like a dream in the creation of characters. The real world is like a launching pad for imagination. You begin there, somewhere, something you've experienced, someone you've met, but you go beyond it. You rocket into the creation of something brand new, a creature that doesn't walk the earth and never has, never will, but walks through the mind, as these characters did we watched tonight. I loved Anne's blending of sort of fact, the story of Horton's life and the history of his family, with actually hearing his art, which was, I'm sure, risky, but boy, it gave a dimension to the film where what mattered to Horton came through tonight. I think his art mattered to him probably more than the town itself of Wharton. He made his own Wharton of imagination.
Yeah, I like the way he said, you know, the widow who hung herself. Like, some of these things maybe didn't happen or not, but it's all like what impressed him, what triggered his imagination, what resonated with him, whether it was real or not. So, can you think of another writer who channeled so much material through one geographical location? I'm just racking my brain here.
Faulkner.
You take it.
But was it, even Faulkner, was it always one town? You know, like to be so
He
specific.
was one county for
and one, yeah.
a big part of his work.
Wharton's pretty small, you know. Still
I know,
is.
but I feel like he
Yeah.
never told the same story twice, and
I
he wrote
know.
for 70 years about that.
I know, that's
almost
it's just-
everything.
it's amazing, really. That
You know,
th-
and
that's
like, who's the guy
all
that,
he needed, you know.
you know, these writers that do the travel writers, and they go to all these exotic
Yeah.
places, and he went to Houston.
Yeah,
That was
yeah.
his, you know,
That's-
like he stepped
that's-
out of the box,
yeah.
man, and young man from Atlanta, like Houston was the setting, and that was kind of, you know, and then he would write about these towns that don't even exist anymore, like Bountiful,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
and
that literally have disappeared. Yeah.
yeah, and that is just the most, you know, as much as I love Tender Mercies more than anything because I worked on it, I have to say that the one film of his that just cracks me up, breaks me up every time I see it is Trip to Bountiful.
Yeah.
That film,
Julie
I
Page,
relate to
she's
that
so
so
good.
well about, you know, that story. But you know, the other thing too that I tried in the film to do, you were just mentioning the blending, you know. Two of my favorite people that I think are really crucial in this film are Murtis Outlaw and Charles Davis, the two that we go back to a lot who had known him for life and live in that town. And what I love about it so much, and in particular with Charles, is that, you know, they tell you, they fill in holes and tell you little tidbits, but that the language they use, in particular Charles, that is almost mirrors. I don't know how to say it really, other than that's Horton's world, and we saw it in those two. I felt like they were more important. They were more important, not so much from the stories they told you and the material they provided, like when the town was founded or whatever, but just the way they spoke. That's kind of how Horton's characters speak. Tie wits and skirt lengths, and that's all those little things.
That's the voice in his head.
Yeah.
You know, but here's a guy who lived in L.A. for a long time, lived in New York.
Right.
Imagine the people he was encountering in his artistic life, his travels. It's big.
Right.
It's big. And yet everything's, not that he's not inspired by that, but it's all channeling back through that prism of that language, those people. It's kind of remarkable. That's why I'm just, I don't know. I'm again looking for precedent. Usually you want to write, I spent a lot of time there. I want to make a story about what I experienced there. But no, it just comes back and goes through that.
Well, I don't know if you noticed or not, but I'm sure you guys did. But I saw Horton many times where he was on stage doing whatever when he was younger, or even accepting his Academy Awards or whatever. And he was so eloquent. He was always just this real kind of Southern, soft gentleman. But then when you were just talking to him, and especially later in his life, he says these things like, Horton, when Michael Wilson asked him, these big Texas skies, that why there's so much space, and he goes, I don't know, my plays, they're very persuasive when they start going in me. And he says things like that. And he says, my wife told me I better get to reading that book. And when you were just talking to him in his real world, in his real language, he said those things. But, then he would, if he was on a stage or something, he was just the most eloquent, but I always loved it. I felt like he also kind of came full circle at the end of his life. He almost became a little, I don't want to say he became childlike again, but I think he kind of went back into that language in a way, because that's obviously the kind of thing he would probably say when he was growing up. Mm-hmm. You better get to reading that book, And I loved those moments where he would say something like that.
Oh. Well, we're kind of dominating the stage. If anyone has any really great questions, Anne's here. Might not get this chance again, so feel free to join in. Just throw your hand up.
Can I?
You want to introduce?
I just want to introduce so that we don't. This doesn't slip past us. I know at least 3 of my producers are here tonight. Joe Dishner, and stand up, Joe. Mark Birnbaum, and can you stand up, Joe? And Jason Whaling, I think, is here. Wherever Jason is, there he is. Every one of these guys helped me so much at different times of this 15-year saga. And I don't think Miguel Alvarez is here, but if he is, please stand up. Don Stokes is not here. And then that beautiful, wonderful, fabulous editor, David Fabello. Where are you? I think he was coming. There you are. Yeah. And are any of the monologue actors here? Oh, we got somebody over here, and I honestly, Rupert did the young man from Atlanta.
Oh, wow.
Is there anybody else I can't see out there? Anyway, so, okay.
So I saw a couple hands up for questions. I feel like.
To me, there's one shot in the film of the Oscar, all of the awards, and if you'll remember, and it just seemed like the essence of Horton, we couldn't find a couple of them to shoot them, and I remember we were leaving the next day, and I think he had his Oscar in MERCIES' house in a suitcase in her closet, and I just remember that being the strangest thing, because that display was recreated in his study, because I guess, he didn't value that much or whatever.
I guess kind of yes and no. I mean, I think he did kind of love his awards, but he was also just he was shy about. Horton was the most unassuming man I've ever met. He did not beat his chest or he was so understated, and
His story of winning the Pulitzer is so good.
What's that?
When he wins the Pulitzer,
oh God, is that
walking around town. That's just like the
that
best
is
story.
classic.
And it feels so hard.
I just thought I'd walk around town and see who knows about it.
And it never hit the paper. Never did.
No. I know.
That's just so
I know,
funny.
and that isn't bullshit. That's Horton. It's really the way he is. So, yeah, he was as down to earth and everyday real as it got. And then, but the fact that he never just threw the towel in either. He just kept working. He didn't know what else to do.
I know. And some people, I guess the death of your spouse or something could really throw you back. I think he had his kids, Hallie, and something kept him going, Or he clearly wasn't looking for an excuse to stop, so.
Yeah.
But no, it's like I say in the film.
He
super
had
inspiring, for
the
anybody.
2.5 years, or close to 3 years, I filmed him. He was working on 2 projects, Dividing the Estate and Orphan's Home Cycle, 2 huge projects.
Yeah.
So, in his 90s. So, there you go.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, I guess you did have that question. Raise your hand. Go ahead.
Yes, that main house is still there, and to my knowledge, nothing's really been moved very much. Horton eventually bought the house next door, so he had 2 houses side by side in Horton. Now that house is the one that his parents. He was born in the little brown house that you see in the film, because his parents had to elope because his mother's family didn't want him to marry the daughter to marry Horton's father, because he had been he was the orphan basically that you hear about throughout the film. Anyway, it wasn't until one day in town his mother overheard somebody. They weren't speaking because they eloped, so they got that little house and were kind of existing on their own. And then his mother was in town one day and overheard someone say that their daughter was pregnant. And that's when they said, wait a minute, this is not right. We've got to reconcile. So they built that house. Their parents built that house. And Horton moved into that house when he was 1 year old. And that house is still there and still looks still got all the stuff in it. Ultimately, he bought another house next door, and that's where his office was, and there were a lot of bedrooms in that other house so he could have the whole family come home. But then since they have sold the second house, and now they just have the main homestead. And I go down there every so often. They let me, I have a key. maybe it still works. No, but at one point I called Hallie and said, we got a lot of photographs from the archives. Horton's archives are at SMU. But I sure need a few more personal photographs. And she said, well, just go down to the house and just ransack the house. So I've spent a lot of time at that house.
Well, they should make it a museum at some point.
I
Wharton,
think
it's a destination. Again, for that affiliation is so strong. So that's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
It would be a great, instead of just going to the grave, which,
the family has talked about it.
Just to see it all. I don't know.
Yeah.
It seems like the town should want that too.
Actually, the family has tried to. They didn't know what to do, and they tried to preserve it. And they started at first. They made a little writer's retreat out of it, and they did something where a writer could come and stay in the house for 2
Right.
months and write. And somehow, and I don't even know the details why it didn't work out, but it didn't work out. And Wharton is an hour out of Houston, and I think they wonder who's really going to come and see this house, you know. And then a little side story, when Harvey flooded Wharton pretty bad. Their library and museum just now reopened after all this time, and it flooded Murtis's house. And Murtis ended up living in Horton's house for a year and a half or so until they got her house back in order. So I don't know where the Oscars were at that time, whether they were in the flood or not, but the house is still there, all the furniture is still there, and I'm not sure to what end it's going to come.
Yeah, there's something great about writers' spaces, though. Like if you,
I got to spend one
here's
night
where
in
they
that.
were. You know, like there's a lot lesser writers who have museum kind of home places you can visit.
Yeah.
Just kind
Shortly after Horton died, we went back down there and shot some extra footage, and there was 2 or 3 of us down. We were shooting some cemetery stuff and some other town stuff, and everyone left and went home. And I stayed one more night because I wanted to just spend some time with Charles and Murtis, and so I stayed in Horton's house by myself for a day and a night. And at first I thought, oh gosh, I don't know, this is going to be either really good or really bad. I didn't know if I would feel a little, you know, ghosty or what. And I'm telling you, I slept like a baby that night. There was just something about that house, great karma. And I sat in that porch swing for a long time, and it was that house is kind of magical in a way. I mean, it's
I don't
him.
know, I don't know why I have this preservation thing. Like, don't let it. I mean, the kids are thinking this, I'm sure. Okay.
Could you talk a little bit more about his collaboration with Michael Wilson and how that developed?
I think I know at least kind of how it developed. Michael Wilson's from Houston, and the Alley Theater started doing a bunch of Horton's plays. You know, the Alley Theater has always supported Horton's work a lot and kind of considered him hometown boy. And Michael, I think Michael just went up and introduced himself to Horton at one point, and Horton was very gracious to him, and he just stayed in touch with him, and that, I don't know all the specifics of it, but that relationship developed, and I think it started somewhere in Houston and somewhere around the Alley Theater. And Michael probably directed more of Horton's plays than anybody. Michael and Jim Houghton, who's also in the film, who's no longer with us, unfortunately. He died a few years ago, but he was probably the second most. He's the guy that founded the Signature Theater in New York. And but Michael Wilson directed tons of Horton's plays, and he was almost like a son to Horton. You know, they were really, really close, and he was just part of the family, you know.
That's so moving when Horton is there, comes into the rehearsal, just that smile, just to be in it, you know. God,
Yeah.
heaven for him. That's winning, you know, to be that age. I mean, the film shows it so well. So, okay.
I want to thank you, Anne. This was wonderful and just brought back a lot of great memories. I don't know if you can see this T-shirt, 1918.
Oh.
So I was on the set with you and Joe, and I just remember the day that these T-shirts showed up, and it's got Andy Warhol written down. And you have the posters up there, and just meeting, you know, getting to be around this, you know, sweet, gentle man, and then knowing that he was buddies with Andy Warhol was just the strangest juxtaposition.
Can everybody hear the question, right?
What's that?
Yeah, no. I just want everybody to. Can everybody hear the?
Could y'all
question?
hear
okay,
that?
I'll repeat it. Yeah, you do see on the wall 1918, and then there's Warhol's signature, and you're saying the T-shirt from 1918, the production in the 80s here in Waxahachie. Yeah. So what was this Warhol-Horton Foote connection?
Honestly, I don't really know the Warhol connection, but I mean, he was just really connected in New York, and I'm sure, there's just a number of those stories. The one I know is when I didn't work on 1918, my ex-husband worked on it, and we had just finished Tender Mercies, so when they were doing 1918, when Horton won the Oscar for Tender Mercies and went away, and I visited the set the day that Horton came. The limo comes down the road and pulls up, and Horton gets out with his Oscar, and it was such a great moment. But anyway, my ex and I got invited to this big party in New York when they finished 1918. They threw some big New York party as a premiere, I guess. And I remember Sleep at the Wheel played the party.
Oh, wow. Perfect.
Because somehow Ray Benson helped with the music for that. And so my ex-husband, Ned Dowd, and I went to this big party. Went to the premiere. Then we go across the street at the Hard Rock Cafe, and the Sleep at the Wheel is playing the Hard Rock Cafe, and Norman Mailer is there. And he was dancing with everybody. And he asked me to dance, and I danced with Norman, and I'm thinking, Horton Foote, Norman Mailer. And he was like the worst dancer I ever danced with. I thought, thank God he can write. And don't tell anyone that. Me and my big mouth. But there was always a Norman Mailer or Andy Warhol or somebody that you would never associate with Horton. And there they were.
Yeah.
Did he ever talk more about how these ideas just came and grabbed him by the throat and possessed him?
Well, it's almost like writing's not easy for anybody. It's hard. But he almost made it sound like he never made it sound like it. He said these stories found him. He said, I don't find my stories, they find me. He always said that. And I remember one time he also said, I start with his sense of place, obviously, because he wrote about that town. Sense of place, the place was always a character in his film, the place itself. And he said, I always start with a place and an event, and I let it take me from there, a place and an event. And then he just had this, the combination of this world around him that he felt was fascinating. Everything in the cracks was fascinating to him. And then you compare that with the imagination that, like Tim talked about, then he was just off and running. And he always talked to me about, like, those stories just carried him. They carried him, he didn't carry them. And it, as a listener for that, you go, oh, then he had it easy. Well, no, it's not easy. It's hard, but because they carry a lot of different directions that you have to backtrack and go another direction. But he always said that he didn't choose the stories, they chose him.
Well, I think we're gonna. Okay, okay, way in the back. Because it's dark back there. Okay.
How did Wharton influence your writing as a screenwriter?
What effect do you think he did have on you as a writer?
Keep it real.
Yeah.
Just honesty. Even when you're making stuff up, there's got to be a level of honesty to it. There's got to be a level of truth that don't show off. Just be real and tell it like it is. Don't. Somehow I feel like Horton didn't even have to fight those battles. I just knowing him the way I know him, and then seeing all those stories he wrote, I didn't see a man that would ever have to fight being a show-off or being a manipulator or being all those things that you can do as a writer that are not good. You know, just say what happened and let the beauty and the terror and the horror and the greatness of that move your audience. Don't tell them how to feel. Just let the story unfold, and you don't have to make them feel a certain way. If you tell a good enough story, they'll feel it. And you say that beautifully in one of your interviews. By the way, I just have to say, this guy, he ended up.
I hear my voice coming on, I'm like, oh no. What
He
am I doing?
he was the last interview I did. He was the first foot of film I rolled was on Horton, and the last foot of film I rolled was on Rick.
Wow.
So there you go, bookended my film.
I'll take
But
that bookend.
I felt like he offered so many things to the film, and little holes that I hadn't filled, or just little icing on the cake here and there. But you had a beautiful way of saying that same thing I just tried to say about how it's up to you to feel it. Horton's not going to force you to feel it. But you do. And also one of my favorite lines in the film is the one Bill Heck says at the end, the actor in Orphan's Home Cycle. He said he hits you upside the head with a feather, but you feel it.
Yeah. I hope there's audiences in the future. I mean, it's kind of a cliche to say, oh, you know, it's everything's sensational, you know, if the Marvel universe we're living in, you know, but it's really up to the audience to take it in. You know, you show the patience, you invest, and you get the reward, you know. I just
Right.
hope everyone can.
Right.
We rely on that.
Do you have anything to say
Obviously,
about that?
but let's just yeah, that's Horton's audience. That's the best audience.
Right.
But you know, it's seen as challenging material in some way because it's not.
Right.
But
You know, somebody else who I think is really important in this film is Jerry Wood, the scholar, who he got Horton's work, and he wrote a lot of books about Horton, and he was a really good thread throughout the film, I think, in kind of showing you and telling you a little bit about, for instance, the proposal scene in the, you know,
Mercies,
yeah,
One of
that's
the
a
greatest
classic
scenes
scene.
ever, yeah.
Yeah, and so many scenes like that.
So
Again,
many.
I wanted to. At the first cut, we had about two more scenes in Tender Mercies, and finally we just had to cut them because it's like, is this film about Tender Mercies or about Horton?
Yeah, in my head, I have like 5 scenes in
The
Tender Mercies
classic
that you-
"I Don't Trust Happiness." We
Yeah,
had to
never
cut that one
trusted-
out.
Oh, yeah.
That was also in the garden, and we picked
Yeah.
which one to use, and we picked the proposal
Yeah,
scene.
well,
You know, to show something, to
That's
show a
so
thing. But
understated.
that classic
Yeah.
scene of "I Don't Trust Happiness" in the garden is really a powerful scene.
Yeah, just devastating. Well, just God, what an inspiration, you know, just any artist who's just themselves, you know, so beautifully themselves. He never tried, seems like remotely to be anything other than himself, you know. It's
No,
such a triumph, you know. So anyway, well, just again, Tim, it's great having you here, you know, and we look forward to tomorrow.
Congratulations to Anne for a beautiful
But
film.
yeah, we're here. We're super fans of Anne's tonight, and yeah, thank you so much for the movie. We're all grateful. May everyone see it. Yeah.
well, thank you, all of you guys, for coming, and be sure and be here tomorrow night. You're in for a treat tomorrow night with Aaron's film about Tim. And anyway, again,
Filmed by the writer, but we have the writer with us, so a little different than
yeah. And if anybody didn't get their question in or wants to nab me in the bar or something, I'll hang out for a little bit.
So anyway,
And hope you loved it.
all right. Thank you, guys.